Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's your boy SoSo, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're already subscribed to the channel, you know what to do. Hit the like button on this video and drop a comment to let us know what you think. Now, this is Sports with SoSo presents Fight Rewind with my main man, Jesse, who's joining me right now as we break down UFC 281. What's up, my brother?
How's it going, Steven? Thanks for
Eric.
having me.
Absolutely, man. I love whenever we get together and get a chance to talk some fights. And this specific episode, we're gonna be focusing on MMA as we just recently had UFC 281 this past weekend, which had two championship belts on the line and a lot of fireworks. I'm sure you were impressed with the card when the news came out.
Yeah, this was a stacked card from the bottom all the way to the top. I think the matchmakers were really onto something on this one. Just some of these cards and some of these fights in the undercard were potential fight night fights. So really good card altogether. I think this was a great answered a lot of questions for us. I think that we had in the last couple months. Just kind of diving through all the weight classes and trying to understand, who's going to fight who's going to win this one. So this card answered a lot of questions.
For sure. And you're right. It did offer a lot of clarification for a lot of divisions because we know that some of these divisions are stacked, right? The middleweight division is stacked. The women's strawweight division is stacked. Even the middleweight the bantamweight division and the lightweight division, they're stacked. So this fight card offered a lot for not only combat sports fans, but more specifically MMA fans, UFC fans. Real quick, I wanted to ask you, man, because I know that you like to watch early and get those prelims in. Who impressed you the most from this weekend's prelims fight?
Yeah, there was a couple of fights that stood out for sure. I would say the biggest one that stood out for me was Ryan Spann versus Dominic Reyes. That was a fight that initially I was like, that might be too big of a step up for Ryan Spann, considering Dominic Reyes had a title
Legend.
shot at one point again, John
Right.
Jones. Two losses against two champs and two different, two former champs. And so, yeah, that one was definitely one that was surprising. Ryan Spann actually knocked him out with a jab, which obviously we don't see very often, but
Crazy power.
so much power in that division. And it just shows you, you're one strike away from really ending the night at that division at 205.
For sure. And you're right. His impressive win was made even more impressive by how quickly it was over, right? He knocked out a real contender, a real heavyweight in Dominic Reyes in the first round, a minute 20 in, and just showcase his power, which is something that you do see a lot in that heavier weight class, but to see it off a jab, it was crazy. For me, I think the fight that impressed me the most in the prelims was excuse me, Henai Herat Henaito. I gotta make sure I say the Brazilian name right. Henaito Moicano. He submitted Brad Riddell with a real naked choke within the first round as well. Very impressive victory for a guy who's trying to make his name in that lightweight division.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's the second. That's the second fight that stood out the most to me. Renato Moicano is, a former champ, someone that has contended for the title a couple times. I think that the biggest thing for him was that post-fight interview. He
Yeah,
really came out and delivered a great post-fight interview. I think he's just tired of being the nice guy. I think he kind of clicked in his head where he realized for me to be able to be marketable, I got to go out there and really start calling the shots and not waiting around and being a company man. Added a gnarly neck tattoo to his resume. So I think it's cool, man. I think some of the fighters really need to acknowledge these things, and that's what's going to sell some pay-per-views. And he's a great fighter. So that was, in my opinion, one of the biggest wins of his career.
absolutely. And hopefully it at least projects him into another big name fight on another big card where he can possibly sneak his way into the main card. Speaking of the main card, this main card was stacked, right? We had the first fight of the evening being Dan Hooker versus Claudio Puelles. And, this fight, with Dan Hooker having his name, having a couple of bad losses on his career, him jumping back into this main event was kind of surprising to see how well he performed, in my opinion. But with a vicious knockout with that kick.
Yeah, perfectly placed front kick to the center of his gravity, basically kicked him in the chest.
Mm,
And then when you look at if you really look at that fight from a technical standpoint, he really catered his approach to Puelles, because Puelles was doing eliminatory rolls, trying to roll into a leg lock, which is what he's known for. He has some really good, heel hooks and knee bars and things like that. So that's what he's made a living off of. And it shows that Dan Hooker was really aware of that, because the way that you want to keep distance between a fight, especially somebody that's trying to roll into a submission or trying to grab onto one of your legs, people normally think you don't want to throw leg kicks in that type of fighter, but you want to throw them down the middle to create that space, and then be able to have your opponent second guess his takedowns or his rolls. And I think he did a great job of that. Not only acknowledging that during the fight, but also capitalizing and landing them as he
correct.
backed up.
Correct.
Very, very impressive win for Dan Hooker.
Absolutely. And you know what? When you're a top level fighter like he is, right? He's an elite fighter, right? We can say that with even just by looking at his opponents. You have to be able to think on the fly in that octagon and change your game plan and see where you have your advantages. And he saw that space, like you said, in the middle and said, you know what? I'm gonna plant this freaking kick in here and see what happens. And sure enough, ended Claudio's night in an impressive fashion. Another guy who had an impressive win was, excuse me, Chris Gutierrez, knocking out the legend of Frankie Edgar. Is Frankie done? Like, is this a real impressive win for Chris, or is it just like you kind of beat somebody on his way out? What do you feel about this fight?
It's a great question. I think this was a great matchup for Chris Gutierrez. I don't think this was a good matchup for Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar's,
For sure.
pushing 40. I think he deserved a more comparable fight, being that this was his departure fight. Nonetheless, he's game for anyone. He has the most octagon time in the company, so he's paid his dues
Legend.
inside the octagon. Future Hall of Famer. I don't think that there's a bad matchup when you have Frankie Edgar in the mix. I think anybody could fight Frankie Edgar, and it'll be a good fight just because everyone wants to see him fight.
For sure.
But Chris Gutierrez is 10 years younger, coming up, real strong guy for that weight division, as you saw. Very crafty with mixed
Right.
it up with his striking. It was hard to watch, man. That was hard to watch because I'm a big fan of Frankie Edgar. So see him get knocked out like that, it was a tough one, but he went out on his own shield. He's a future Hall of Famer. I mean, what more does that guy need to accomplish in the sport?
Right. And like you said, he's fighting a guy who's pretty much in his prime right now in Chris Gutierrez. This guy's 30, just turned 31 this year, has had some good victories under his belt to propel him into this main card. His 19th victory overall in his career. I don't know if Frankie has the same type of motivation right now today that he did when he first got into the UFC or even first into MMA, right? For a guy like Chris, he's putting everything he has into that to try to get to Frankie's level. You know what I mean? So it was kind of sad, like you said, to see him go out on his shield like that. But at least he had the opportunity to go in there and show, like, hey, I'm still a threat, because he is a threat with the high level skill, weapons that he has at his disposal.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. Frankie is a game opponent. We've seen him in so many different battles with so many different guys that have crossed
Right.
so many different weight classes. So the fact that he was able to fight, in on the big stage, the biggest stage in the world, in my opinion, MSG, didn't go out the way he wanted to go out, but I don't think he lost respect from any fans.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? I think the fans respected Frankie's, willingness to go in there and put everything on the line and really give an opportunity to have a show and enjoy the fight itself. So shout out and salute to Frankie, man. Hopefully he becomes a great commentator, and I just feel like that's his next evolution, man. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this UFC card. Let's start with Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. A lot of problems between these two guys, a lot of beef, a lot of smack talking. Talk to me about how you felt, who had the advantage coming into this fight, because anybody on the outside would say this fight is kind of even, but I kind of felt like DP had the advantage going into this fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it came down to exactly what they were talking about during the press conference. If it's going to go into a wall exchange, Dustin Poirier is going to win that exchange. He's a little bit more technical with the striking, a little bit less caveman style.
Right.
Swinging left and right like Chandler, which is just his style. It's not a bang on him in any way. I just think that as a strategic approach from Dustin Poirier, I felt a lot more comfortable putting my money on him than Chandler. However, Chandler just definitely has the edge in the power, right? We've seen it over and over. He
For
knocked out,
sure.
almost won the belt on his second fight, and he's a warrior. Has a granite chin. I mean, he took a lot of punishment in that fight. He
Yeah.
he had a couple different angles. He was tricky. He landed his own shots. But when all was said and done, just man, Dustin Poirier is just when is this guy's prime gonna start to decline? Because I mean, he's finished Gaethje, he's finished Chandler, he's finished McGregor. I mean, he is to me the hardest lightweight in that path right now.
Absolutely. And look, and the only guy he's lost to was the guy holding the belt. You know what I mean? So, like, when you look at Dustin Poirier and what he's been able to accomplish in this lightweight division is like astounding. And credit to Michael Chandler for being game and actually, going forward and standing there and saying, "I'm willing to trade." Both of these guys were right around the same totals when it came to strikes. 65 for Chandler, 63 for Poirier. Significant strikes. Michael actually had the lead to 43 to 38. So he was able to exert some of his game plan and dominate in some aspect. But I think that injury, that cut to his face from those vicious and precise strikes that Dustin is known for, really kind of just sucked his energy. And then, like, when Michael took Dustin down, it was like, all right, let me see if I could work something here. When he figured that Dustin wasn't gonna cave on that, and Dustin got back on top, it was like it's over.
That's it, and that's exactly what it came down to. Chandler seemed to have the power advantage. Dustin Poirier seemed to have a little bit of a speed advantage and a little
Right.
bit more of a placement precision advantage where those strikes are going to go before they go. And we saw it, man. He landed a couple big shots, but didn't waver Michael Chandler. I mean, you
Nope.
literally have to put that guy out for him to be out of the competition. So I don't think Chandler lost too many points in terms of sliding down in the rankings. You still got to give that guy top five. He's giving you fight of the year last year. He's giving you some pretty big wars. Gave you a knockout from Tony Ferguson's another one that he knocked out.
A
I mean, this
beautiful
guy,
knockout.
these guys, both these guys are guys that are winning fights. They're finishing fights impressively. He might slide a couple spots there in the rankings, but Michael Chandler, I think, is still set up to have some big fights in the UFC, but not bigger than what we saw from Dustin Poirier.
Absolutely. I think Dustin gets another shot at the belt within the next two big fight cards. Let's move on to a very controversial fight, right? The co-main event of the evening, women's strawweight title is on the line. Carla Esperanza versus Zhang Wei Li. And this fight was controversial because Carlo had taken the belt from Thug Rose in a controversial decision, which was a split decision. And now she's facing the woman who Rose knocked out and beat single-handedly, like twice back to back, in order to fight to keep her belt. And Zhang was kind of way more of a match for Carlo than she could ever expect. And it felt like she had no chance. Well, how'd you see it play out?
Yeah, this was an interesting fight. I From the very beginning, I definitely gave Wei Li Zhang, the advantage really overall, except with the wrestling. Carla Esparza, probably the best wrestler in the whole division.
Right.
She was the first person to hold the belt in that division. Came back around, paid her dues, put together a winning streak, got the chance, got the belt. Um, but I still think that within that journey, it still wasn't as impressive as what Wei Li was able to accomplish in her journey. But regardless of fact, Wei Lee just seems to continue to get better. Even in her second loss against Rose, she looked better. She looked
For
physically
sure.
better. She looked technically sound. And in this fight, you saw she was on a mission. She wants that belt. And let me tell you something, man. I think Wei Lee holds the key to really putting UFC on the next level.
Hmm.
And I think that if they were able to do a pay-per-view in China, I
Oh
think that
man,
that's going to blow some pretty big numbers,
that would
considering
be
she's
amazing.
a favorite. Yeah.
That would be amazing, and especially if it's like since she won the belt. And by the way, she looked like she was in prime physical shape for this fight, so you could tell, like you said, she was hungry for it. If they could make that trilogy fight with Thug Rose for the belt in China, how crazy would that be, man?
Yo, that would be great. That would be great. I think that, Rose still needs to put some work in to build that fight because
Right.
Rose was very, very active for the last couple of years. She took one loss from Andrade. She took about a year and a half off, came back. So she hasn't been as active as she was before. But I
True.
would say if she strings another win or a very impressive win or two, um, let me tell you that would be a very, very big fight in
Huge
China.
fight. Huge fight, and I'm sure it would make huge numbers. And congratulations to Zhang Weili for winning the belt. Like hopefully, like you said, we see her fighting pretty soon for against another top contender. Maybe who Jessica Andrade. She's been on a little bit of a streak. Who knows? Now
And
let's
oh,
go ahead.
sorry, real quick, I wanted to add this. Whaley became a two-time champ,
That's
and
right.
Rose was the first two-time champ.
That's
A few
right.
months back. So now we got two-time champs in that division.
Crazy, crazy. I'm telling you, man. We said it before, in the beginning of the conversation, but that straw weight division in the women's division is stacked with so many good fighters, man. It's crazy. They're sitting on a gold mine there, the UFC. Now let's talk about the main event of the evening: Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. And this was a huge fight because it had so much backstory into it. We know that Alex was the guy who not only beat Izzy twice, but knocked him out in that second win. And that's crazy because that knockout kind of propelled Izzy into the MMA world where he blew up and took off, right? And became a champion of UFC. Talk to me about what you thought was going to happen heading into this fight, and how you saw the fight translate itself into reality.
Yeah. So with Izzy being, the reigning champ in that division with zero losses in that division, strung together one of the most impressive winning streaks I've seen, and that I can recall for sure, and especially in that weight class, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
My initial thought was the further it gets into the rounds, the more that Izzy gets to test Pereira Boatan's cardio.
Right.
um, Botan is known for having a good cardio, but if you watch his first fight, he's 6, 7 fights into MMA. His first fight, he took a loss, and then he hadn't lost since that first loss, and he gassed out. That's basically in a shell. He gassed out in that fight and then took a couple shots.
Right.
My biggest concern for Izzy is sort of what kind of played out for us. If he really puts together, a couple combinations to the leg, is that going to compromise Izzy's movement? That's what we know Izzy for, is his elusiveness, hard to hit. He's hard to hit while hitting you. So it's a couple. He kind of projects a couple different problems simultaneously, which is I'm hard, I'm elusive, I can't get hit, and you're eating some shots while you're trying to hit me. Um,
One
you
thing
know,
that stood out for me is Adam, and I don't know if you noticed the same thing, was the power difference. The power that Alex carries, right? And he walked into that fight around what, 220, 215 pounds, right? Versus Izzy probably walking in there at 190, 195. The power difference between the two guys was evident, like because like you said, Izzy was landing some big shots, but they didn't look like they could hurt Alex. And Alex shots look like if they landed correctly, they could definitely hurt Izzy. And once we saw him, slow him down with that leg kick that he'd been investing in the whole fight, then he got a chance to slow Izzy down and really land those power shots. They ended up calling it.
yeah, I mean, and let's call the elephant in the room. When have we seen another fighter make Izzy look small?
Yeah. Except for
Like,
John Blachowicz, where he went up in weight.
right, right. And those guys cut, those guys are heavyweights that are cutting to make the 205, right?
Correct.
Um, big dude, big hands, big hands.
Big hands, man.
Looks like a different type of weight class. So for me, one of the most impressive things was like, is this guy gonna make weight? This guy's big. This guy's big. He has 7 MMA fights. Like, right?
Right.
What's the precedence there? We don't know. There's very small sample to go by. The
True.
sample that I went by was like, okay, well, he's a kickboxer. He's made a similar weight in the past. But if he makes this weight, is he going to compromise his cardio? I think that
Mm,
was the question for me from a technical standpoint is, well, he's a big guy, but he's also very lean. He's very strong. So maybe he's not really cutting so much of his power
true.
or his tank because he's very healthy and he's in shape. Evidently, we saw it. Fifth round, you and I chatted a little bit and chopped it up, and we're like, well,
Yeah.
if it goes to the end of the round, Izzy might have the advantage. That's what we've seen. He was winning the fight. Izzy was winning the fight.
Completely.
And there was a couple rounds, maybe you could say maybe 2 rounds that Alex won, but how do you take the belt away from the champ that way?
Right.
Um, I think that was one of the most impressive wins, and I think Izzy took it very professionally. I
For
think he
sure.
was expecting it, and I think that played a little bit into the negative part of how he fought, and I'll explain what I mean. He initially said, "I don't understand why I'm not the underdog." That means that already in his head, he's already thinking, "I should be the underdog, right? I'm
Right.
down." But I think that from a mental standpoint, I think that if you're already doubting yourself, you're already kind of letting that thought in. And I'm not saying that Izzy was doubting himself. I'm saying that the thought was in his head. So for me, it was just like, man, this is a tough fight. The
For
last thing
sure.
that you remember as a fighter who's strung a big long win streak like Izzy has is who's the last guy that beat you, and how did that person beat you?
Yeah.
Um,
And you know what? He mentioned that a lot, in the press conferences and in the build up to the fight. Like, oh, this guy has the 2 wins on me, so he can talk all the crap he wants. He's deserved that. He can say that, whatever. uh, this is a fight game. This is not like basketball where you expect to lose and bounce back, or football game you can bounce back. Like, this is just you in a cage. So that mental fortitude is probably 80 to 90% of what of the importance of what happens, right? Because we've seen fighters come back from near death, like chokeholds and all types of stuff, because they tell themselves, hey, I can't lose this fight mentally, and they're able to bounce back. So it's interesting that you pointed that out, because I kind of got the same vibe. I felt like it was a little bit of a relief for Izzy to lose and say, you know what, I could put the belt away and kind of take a step back from having this pressure, and then come back to it later. But I don't know if he's gonna get that chance, because Alex looks like he's the real deal.
and look, it speaks volumes to Izzy's character. Izzy is who he says he was. He's
True.
that guy. I'm gonna fight. I lost. I'm 0-3. I'm gonna fight him again.
Yeah.
As a fighter,
100%.
someone that's 0-3, let's just call it, I'm down one, right? In the UFC, I'm
Right.
down one, and I'll fight him again. But having that history of having two previous losses to the same guy, now three, you got to be a different breed to get back in there and say, you know what, I'm willing to risk it all. I don't care. I'm that guy, and I'm gonna fight him. Win or lose. To me, that speaks volumes about who Izzy is, and he is the guy that he said he was.
For sure. And he's a legitimate champion and a true warrior, right? He gave his respect not only to Alex and the rest of his coaching staff, and said, you know what? He was the better man tonight. I'm not going to make any excuses. I'm going to go back and work hard and see what happens. So, muito parabéns para você, Alex. And, I hope to see this guy keep kicking ass, man. I love when Brazilians get on top, bro, and kick ass in the UFC, because those guys bring a lot of excitement to the fight game, man. Jesse, this was an amazing conversation, interview. I don't know what you want to call it, but we got to keep doing these things more often, bro. And we're gonna have a chance to, because we got a couple events coming up. We have BKFC 34 coming up at the Hard Rock here, December 3rd. Tyson Fury's fighting that night versus Derek Chisora, and then a week later we got UFC 282. Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira, who's the trainer partner for Alex Pereira.
Yep.
I don't know. Are they gonna have two champions for a while there in that training gym?
I can't wait to see that fight. I can't wait to
Right?
see that fight. And I think, dude, when these guys were training together, I don't know if you saw a couple of those clips of Glover Teixeira and Alex kind of
Yeah,
sparring.
man.
They're really going at it, and one of their training partners had to come and separate them. I love
Yeah,
that.
bro.
I love when guys train as if their teammates' fights are their fights, right?
For
They're
sure.
all in it together. I love to see that camaraderie and that teamwork when these guys are going in there, man, and they're going in together. Yeah, one guy's getting closed in the cage, but he's representing the whole dojo, the whole squad.
Abs-
So,
Absolutely, man. We've seen it multiple times. We saw it with Izzy's camp, we saw it with Alex's camp, and we saw it recently even more with Charles the Bronx, his camp and the guys that he's traveled with. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
so for these MMA guys, like it's really about that team mental fitness, team mentality, and staying
support.
strong together. Great,
Yeah,
bro.
absolutely. All that support, man. All that support goes a long way, and these guys are not just one person; they're a whole unit when they show up. So, love
Absolutely,
watching
man.
it. Love watching it.
Me too, man. I can't wait to do this again, Jesse. Thank you so much for joining me, man. And we're gonna catch you guys more often with this fight rewind. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, drop a comment, let your friends know. And until next time, y'all, peace.